Italian, but, established himself in Baja, making some, what we call, and they didn't know the word boutique, no one else did, making boutique wines. And now it's a Napa Valley. I mean, it's spectacular. I mean, what an adventure that is. And for me, it was so exciting to watch what took place, from this little drive out of Ensenada, which no one even went to, east, going towards Tecate, the little town of Tecate. Mm-hmm. Well, here's this Guadalupe Valley that is absolutely breathtaking, and it gets the coastal fog from the Pacific Ocean, and, they were growing, I think, oranges and citrus or nothing there, Yeah. And then all of a sudden, it's an incredible vineyard, this whole area.
Yeah, it's really a special place, and I've actually ran into several people that ask about you because they know my connection with off-road. They all want to know how you're doing, and they said that they've known you for so many years. Sal, there's so many things just in one sentence that I could ask you questions about. So I'm going to bounce around a little bit because there's a couple things I'd like to get on the air today, and there's no question that I'll have to have you back on if you're willing to, in the near future. But you talked earlier, and you went really fast through it, and this isn't really an off-road racing show, but you mentioned racing your first race in the late 60s, knowing that you're from L.A., you've had a little bit of exposure. How did you get the invite to race in a buggy, being from where you're at? I know you were with Peterson at the time, but just please, because I know a lot of people haven't heard that story, how did you get an invite to go race the Baja 1000?
Well, when I graduated from college in 1962, I went to the University of San Francisco, came back to Los Angeles, and I was living at home, waiting to go into service. I thought I was going to be drafted, and my dad, as I mentioned earlier, had a garage on 7th and Vermont, which is downtown Los Angeles now, and he employed about 6 or 7 mechanics, and he was a very good mechanic and, did a fair job and was an honest guy working on cars back then. That's before you had a computer and, you actually had points and condensers and alternator and things that people don't understand today, spark plugs and things of that nature. But anyway, I went to work for him, and I'm really not a mechanic, and my dad knew it too, but he took my business skills and I helped with the shop and started the management stuff and everything. But anyway, then from there I went to Peterson Publishing Company as ad salesman. And Peterson at that time was the largest special interest publication in the world. They had Hot Rod, Motor Trend, Guns and Ammo, Flying, Surfing, Teen Magazine, and a number of others. And I became an ad salesman for a drag racing magazine called Carcraft. Mm-hmm. And from that, I became the ad salesman for Hot Rod Magazine. And Mr. and Mrs. Peterson somehow almost adopted me as their child. I was one of the youngest employees at Peterson at that time. And I traveled to there were 7 offices across the United States, and so I was able to travel of Hot Rod. I would go along with some of the photographers and editorial people and look at some of the places they were talking about doing stories on, and I suggested that at that time the kit cars and model cars were a big deal. That's when kids actually built balsa wood or plastic model cars and boats and toys and things of that nature. And there was a company that was privately owned, husband and wife, really nice people, right in where Marina Del Rey is today. In fact, I think their building is now a Ralph's Market right in the center of Playa del Rey, Marina Del Rey in Los Angeles. And they were kind of, in a way, Revell model car kit is what was named, and then there was Mattel, and then there was a company out of the East Coast that was a big model car kit. And I was going through, and the husband and wife, I can remember, I think their names were Glasser, very nice people. And we were walking through and seeing how they would build a mock-up of, let's say a 32 Roadster or a Cadillac or a airplane model or whatever, and they were actually doing them there. Then they would inject mold them and do the plastic and put them in a beautiful box, and you'd buy them at what they called hobby shops, and I don't think they even have those anymore around the United States. But you go in, and for a kid like me, it was fun to go to a hobby shop. It was like a toy store, but you could see all these great World War I and II planes, and you could build them, and it was just a fun thing to do. You weren't sitting there on an iPad or doing texting. You were doing something with your hands. So anyway, there was this Baja bug, a Baja bug that was sitting there, just beautiful, and I knew what a Baja bug was and
Sure.
stuff because we did some stories in Hot Rod on, at that time, Perlman was the owner of NORA. He started really the first competitive event in Baja off-roading, I think in 1967. And I saw this thing, and it was just gorgeous. And they said, yeah, this is, we build a full-scale model, but then we're going to build a model car off of it so that we can sell it to the public because we think off-roading and this is going to be a unique adventure. And in fact, it's going to race in the Baja 500 that was coming up. Would you like to race in it?
Wow.
And, having the opportunity, which I was not a racer, but I was involved in racing because I'd go to Daytona, I'd go to the Salt Flats, go to Lake Mirage, go to Bonneville, go to Indianapolis, go to the circle tracks here, Ascot, because we would cover all those. And so I knew the racers. I had the privilege of all the drag racers at that time because Southern California was the mecca of drag racing at that time. But I was not, a grease monkey per se or a real hardcore mechanic, but I was just an enthusiast and appreciated that. And I was thrilled, and I said, yeah, because I could do whatever I wanted as a publisher of Hot Rod. It was a golden key to open the door to anything, because people would think, if they saw you, you might be on the cover of Hot Rod magazine, and that was an instant success for anybody that wanted to sell anything or a story on whatever you were doing. So bottom line is I co-rode down in Baja, and boy, that just hooked me. I mean, I loved it. They loved We Broke, obviously, which is the experience. I've always said that, Baja is a challenge against machine and the human being, and the terrain, and usually the terrain wins. You just can't put your foot to the metal, as as being a long-time racer in Baja. And at that time, I raced, and I won't say I raced. I competed, okay?
Sure.
But then I was flying all over the world, going to Europe to see a new Mercedes out of single feet and being produced, and going to Detroit to watch the long lead previews. And then, Baja kind of was exciting, but it wasn't, I wasn't going to be a professional racer at that time in my life. Bottom line was, they called me back and they said, would you like to race this in the Baja races? Because we got some exposure with you in it, and it was great that you did it, and we'll give you the car.
Wow.
And that's what happened. They gave me the Baja bug. My ad salesman at the time, Bob Waglin, who was a roundy round type Walter Mitty racer type thing, but he understood and he knew how to work on cars, and the two of us went in, and that's how I got started actually in the racing end of it in Baja, and I fell in love with it. But at that time, that was 1969. Again, I never, there was no score. I knew Mickey Thompson because I did stories on the things that, his wheels, his manifolds, his adventures in Indy and Bonneville and his boat racing, and also the Mexican 1000, that he had a tragic incident down there in the mainland, and then his competing with Parnelli Jones and James Garner and McQueen and all that. And Baja was starting to get that kind of an image. And next thing I know, Perlman has a problem. We're racing down there, and he runs into some kind of a problem with the Mexican government, and the Mexican government asks him to leave. That was like in 1971 or 2, and the Mexicans put on the race themselves, and it was a total disaster. And the next thing I know, the Mexican governor, who's friend of mine's friend down in Baja, Pepe Limon, says, hey, we'd like to talk to you and Mickey Thompson, because Mickey was really doing well in Baja, and his name was in the automotive industry quite a lot, and you're in the publishing business. The governor would like to meet with you and see how you could help promote the events. And so I flew down to Mexicali with Mickey, thinking, we were going to have a meeting with the governor, and I had never been to actually Mexicali. I thought that'd be a lot of fun, and it was on a weekend that I wasn't traveling with Hot Rod. And I thought, gee, this will be great. And, I could do a story and see what the guy has to say. And next thing I know, we're sitting in a great, I'll never forget, the Boom Boom Room in Mexicali, where all the officials, government official would go to. And it was the first place that I'd ever been in a restaurant that, let's say you ordered a scotch and water, they actually put the bottle of scotch on the table, and someone else ordered a vodka martini and put and you made your drink, so the guy made it, and they didn't write anything down. They just looked at the bottle and how much was consumed. That's how they charge it. And, that was kind of impressive to me, because, I said, God, that's fun. What a great deal. I've never seen that in the United States,
Yeah,
so
sure.
Bottom line, we're flying back from Mexicali, and Mickey says, you know what? He says, this off-road is going to be a great deal. I want to start a company, and I want you to be the president. Now, this is all happening in his single-engine plane, and he was flying it, which to this day, I swear to God, I don't think he was a pilot, but we'd get in the air and we would land, somehow, and that was impressive to me.
Knew what he was doing.
So, bottom line is, it took him almost a year and a half to convince me, because I'd see him at Indy, I'd see him at Bonneville, I'd see him at Ascot, I'd see him at the drag, and he said, Sal, I'm doing this thing, and you're the guy. I'll give you, a part of the business, and this thing's going to be bigger than NASCAR. And NASCAR at that time was, and Indy was big time race. I was just underneath my breath. I was laughing, saying, shit, this is not going to happen. And I decided, he got me at a moment. I said, I got the world by the balls, to put it bluntly, at Hot Rod, but maybe I had to try something different. And I was really loving Mexico. And that was in 1973. I told Mr. Peterson I was going to leave, and he was very gracious. He said, well, I really appreciate what you've done for Peterson Publishing Company. He says, if it doesn't work, you've got a job back here always, we'll take you back. And that was, I could never, my ego and personality would have never allowed me to have to go back,
Yeah.
And that's how it happened, and that's how Score, with Mickey really started. And I learned Mickey was a tough taskmaster and an incredible, unique individual. He and his wife. In fact, his wife at the time, which I didn't realize, she was dating Mickey. She was my secretary at Hot Rod. Next thing you know, they got married, and then all of a sudden, here I'm working. I'm going to say with, but it really was for Mickey Thompson and the development of Score. And then I was fortunate enough to buy Mickey out prior to he and his wife's tragic murders.
Yeah.
And because he wanted to do the stadium racing, and I wanted to stick with what we were doing in Baja. And, I was expanding racing in California and Nevada at the time. And that's how it happened. And 40 years later, I was still doing it. I hope I didn't bore your listeners, but there's a lot in between that I could talk about.
Yeah, we're going to circle back one day, and we're going to talk about the in between, because I can only imagine the amount of memories that you have with all those years. But let's just do one thing for the listeners, and I know there's so many people that haven't heard that story, and I know you shared it with me over probably a bottle of tequila on the table at some point. But can you give us just one memory that stands out in your mind about Baja, and whether that's racing or not, but just something that really was special to you in Baja in your travels down there?
Well, Jim, God, that is a hard question to answer, because I've had, and I know it sounds flippant, but I've had so many one-off unique experiences down there, and I would have to kind of God, I don't want to slight some because I met, meeting Mama Espinosa and Mike Leone. These are people that really were pioneers back. And then I think I would have to say, besides the beauty and seeing places that are now 5-star destination places, that in my mind